Okay, good afternoon. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Shane Evans. I'm going to be the host for this webinar series, which we have entitled Watering Wisdom. I did unmute myself, so I am speaking to everyone. This is our Watering Wisdom webinar about growing a healthy lawn with less water. This is a 5-part webinar series, and today we will be discussing part 1, which talks about outdoor water use within the Twin Cities metro area. Now, to give you some background on what's going to be going on in the future webinars, these are going to be happening every 3 weeks. And on the 28th of July that you see there, we're going to be talking about irrigation controllers. There's a lot of new technologies coming out, and we're going to show you how to program them, what kind of technologies are available, and how they can best help you more efficiently water your lawns and landscapes. The other series in August, we have turfgrass species for low input Minnesota lawns, followed by lawn care best management practices. That's going to cover things such as mowing, fertilization, and then we'll finish at the end of September with winterizing your lawn. As you shut down your irrigation systems, as the leaves start to fall, and we start to see a little bit of snow. For those of you who aren't familiar with Zoom, we're going to have a Q&A section at the end of this webinar. We have 4 panelists today, including me, Brian Davis, with the Metropolitan Council, Eric Watkins here at the University of Minnesota. He's a professor in the Department of Horticulture, and Chris Moncada, who is a part of the Minnesota Turfgrass research team. She's going to be leading the Q&A at the end. As you can read there, the chat is disabled, but there is a live transcript going at the bottom, and depending on which device you're using, that can be turned off. To access that Q&A section, you can just hover over the Q&A bubble at the bottom of the Zoom, at the bottom of your screen. It should pop up. And when you click on that Q&A bubble, you should see a screen on the right that pops up. That's where you can type your questions. You can submit them. And again, at the end, Chris will be leading us in a Q&A session for us 4 panelists. So diving right into it again, this first first webinar is going to be about outdoor water use in the Twin Cities and how you can learn if you're using too much. Brian and I will be the presenters for today. Brian is going to start off our presentation, and then I'm going to finish it up, followed by the Q&A. So with that, Brian, I'll let you kind of take over. I'll stop my video and I'll pick up where you leave off.
All right, thank you very much, Shane. Very happy to be here with you today in this webinar. I am just going to give a rather short summary of water supply in our 7-county metropolitan area here in the Twin Cities to give some overview as to why we're interested in the topic of irrigation and turfgrass in the metro area and the impacts it has on water. We have about 3 million people in our metropolitan area, quite a few, 186 different communities in that 7-county region, and that includes 106 different water suppliers, so 106 different utilities. All those are shown on this map in the blue shaded portions of the map. 70% of the residents in our metropolitan area use groundwater as their water source. 30% use surface water. So there's a high proportion of people who use groundwater here. Our municipal water use is currently about 300 million gallons per day, sometimes going up to about 350 million gallons per day in the summer. It's projected to grow by the year 2040 to about 450 million gallons per day because of the increase in population that is occurring here. Next slide, Shane. So what makes us different than other metropolitan areas? One big thing is that we have 106 different utilities here. That is very different than many other large metropolitan areas in the United States where there is 1 or maybe 2 major utilities for the entire metro area. Here, we have a lot of different utilities, and you can see that when you're driving around and you look at all the different water towers that are around the metro area, keep an eye out for that next time you're out and about. You can see all of these different names of our communities on the water towers, and it's because they are all utilities that own and operate their own public water supply system for their community. And I think that's a really great asset here that makes us different. We have a lot of community buy-in to our water supply because we are the owner and operators of it. Next slide. We're very fortunate here to have 4 extensive aquifers beneath our feet to supply the groundwater that 70% of the residents in our metro area use. We have the deepest aquifer, which is the Mount Simon Hinckley Aquifer, the Tunnel City Waniwak, the Prairie du Chien Jordan Aquifer, and then at the very top, in some places, we have what we call the Quaternary Aquifer, which consists of aquifers in sediments that were deposited by the glaciation that has occurred here about 4 times in geologic history. Next slide. So what this means is we have a lot of wells to tap those aquifers. As you can see on this very pockmarked map, we have about 800 public water supply wells in the 7-county metro area. Those are the green dots, the dark green dots. And we also have at least 60,000 private wells scattered around the 7-county metro area, shown by the blue dots. The darker blue dots are older wells and lighter blue dots are newer wells. So you can see through the green dots the proliferation of public water supply wells in the suburbs and the exurbs in the metro area. You don't see those in Minneapolis and St. Paul, of course, because those are the oldest 2 cities. They developed pretty early in the mid-1800s, and we didn't have electricity at the time. Pumps like we have now had not been invented yet. And we had this wonderful clean river, the Mississippi, which was right there for a water supply. And so very little groundwater use in those cities, except for some industries that have put wells in to serve what they need to do. But you can see through this map, we have a lot of wells in our metro area. We have a lot of groundwater, and the quality is generally pretty good in most places. Next slide. And of course, we have the Mississippi River. Fortunate to have that river, which flows from north to south. St. Paul and Minneapolis both use it as their primary water supply, and they each serve a number of the older suburbs right around Minneapolis and St. Paul, including cities like Mendota Heights and Crystal, Roseville, and a couple other cities like that. So we do have the Mississippi River, and as I said before, about 30% of the people who live here use it as their water source. Next slide. So we can see the evolution of groundwater and surface water use in the metro area in this graph right here. If we go back to the 1940s, we had the vast majority of residents using surface water, shown by the green line, and a much smaller proportion using groundwater, which is the blue line. As time went on after World War II, we had the development of many suburbs in our metro area, expansion of population, and also the advancement in technology for wells, drilling wells and putting pumps down wells. So we had a rapid increase in groundwater use throughout the second half of the 20th century as the suburbs grew. And we can see that for surface water with the green line, the water use increased a bit and then started decreasing as the population decreased in the major cities, and also as we had deindustrialization and overall increase in efficiency and indoor use. Next slide. However, our population is growing, including in the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and of course, including the suburbs and the outer ring suburbs. And that means more water use, probably about 100 million gallons per day additional municipal water use by the year 2040 as the population increases. And most of that population increase will be outside of the 2 large cities, but there'll be some there too. Next slide. Here's a graph of water use in one of the 2 big cities in our metro area from 1990 through 2012. We can see the winter use in blue and the summer use in green. And of course, the summer use is always greater than the winter use here, because in our climate, there are some things that we do in the summer that we don't do in the winter. We irrigate, we have swimming pools, we wash cars outside, we water our gardens and things like that. So you can see that the ratio of summer use to winter use in this city, is around 2 to 1, and sometimes less than that, maybe 1.5 to 1. Next slide. Here is a developing suburb. Very different scenario. If we go back to 1990, there was very little water use simply because there weren't that many people there, but the population of this particular suburb has increased greatly, especially after the year 2000. And one of the things that's very interesting about this suburb, and this is very common for suburbs, is that the summer use has increased quite rapidly relative to the winter use. And that is primarily because we have a lot more irrigation systems now than we had prior to the year, say, 1995. There's been a big change in technology and also in behavior with outdoor irrigation, such that it's come to be a common practice and also an expected amenity for many homes that are being built now and in the past 20, 25 years. That means that summer use can be sometimes 3 to 1 or 4 to 1 as a ratio to winter use. Next slide. And of course, why? Well, irrigation. We have lots of irrigation in the metropolitan area now. And it's something that you can see quite commonly in a situation like you see in the photo here. But we also have some issues that have arisen because of this increase. Next slide. Here we see the change in water use over a year's time from the 1990s through the 2010s for another community. So you can see here's another example of the increase in the ratio of the summer use to the winter use, even from the 1990s up through the end of the 2010. There's been a significant change even in this community due to irrigation. Next slide. So what are the problems that can result from increased water use and also from the increased irrigation use in the summer? Well, we can have aquifer drawdown in certain parts of the metro area. This map here shows the results of some groundwater modeling that has been done, that we have done, showing the change in the level of one of the aquifers under the 2040 pumping conditions as compared with pumping conditions today. Darker blue colors means that the aquifer is going to be drawn down more relative to today. And so you can see that there are a number of areas in the metro area where we have a good amount of aquifer drawdown. This can be a problem depending on the connectivity of surface water features like lakes and wetlands to the underlying aquifer. It can also be a problem for some communities if the aquifer is drawn down below the level of the pump in the well. You may have to drill deeper or drill to a deeper aquifer and put the pump lower. That can be quite expensive. Next slide. And also, it leads to excess infrastructure being built. A community that has a very high summer to winter water use ratio may end up having to have a significant number of wells that operate in the summer that don't operate in the winter. So as an example, a community might need, say, 20 wells for operating on a peak summer day during a dry spell with irrigation, and on a winter day may need only 4 or 5. So what that means is there are a lot of wells that need to be installed but don't operate for a large chunk of the year, and that's expensive because you have to, for the entire year, secure, maintain, occasionally operate, heat, cool, take care of that infrastructure that is not working for you. So one of the goals that we have here for our growing region is to try to see how we can increase the efficiency of the existing irrigation systems and of new ones going in so that we can knock down that summer peaking factor in the future so that fewer new wells need to go in over time. So we want to use the existing infrastructure more. And we can do that by getting better at our irrigation. And there's a lot of opportunity we have found to get better with our irrigation practices. Next slide.
Brian, for that.
I'll hand it over to Shane here.
Yeah, thank you for that, those good points. And I just want to reiterate some of the things that Brian said, focusing on why we need to conserve and use our water more efficiently. The first bullet point there states environmental sustainability. Now, the pictures you see below were both in Brian's previous slides, but the one on the right shows that aquifer drawdown. And this, maybe isn't an issue right now, maybe not be an issue in the near future, but at some point, if we continue to grow here in the Twin Cities metro area, there may come, kind of a breaking point or peaking point where we're not sure if we're going to have to dig deeper, as Brian mentioned, if there's going to be some issues with lakes and wetlands that are surrounding the area. And so to be good environmental stewards, and by using our water more efficiently, that'll help future generations have less things to worry about. Another aspect of why we need to use our water more efficiently is the resource competition. There's a lot of industries that need this water. We have agriculture, you have industry and commercial areas. And Brian mentioned a big one that has continued to grow in the last 10 to 15 years is that residential area. New suburbs are popping up, and that kind of leads into those bottom 2 points of our supply may not necessarily be increasing, but the demand definitely is, as more people and more industries are moving into the Twin Cities metro area. And the graphic there on the bottom left, by 2040, it's estimated that 100+ million gallons of water per day are going to be used as compared to 5 years ago. And when it comes to utility cost, Brian talked a lot about outdoor water use and irrigation systems, sprinkler systems. And we hope what you learned today and in the upcoming webinars will help reduce some of that utility cost for residential and commercial owners and help them, in addition to saving some money, helping conserve and use our water a little bit more efficiently. But oftentimes, what you see when you walk around residential neighborhoods is an irrigation system that may not be very efficient. If you take a look at this picture, you can see the sprinklers are hitting a lot of sidewalk, a lot of the driveway. If you look at that middle section of grass with 2 sprinkler heads in it, maybe turn that into all pavement rather than have that little section of grass in the middle, because those 2 sprinkler heads are watering just about as much, driveway as they are grass. And this can sometimes lead to lawns and irrigation systems being scrutinized. So from some local newspapers here, we can read some of these headlines that say turf war, overwatering our lawns is sucking up our water supply. Or the middle one there, overwatering lawns and pavement. It's the norm in the Twin Cities. These are the types of things we hope this webinar series and in general, the University of Minnesota Turfgrass research team and the Metropolitan Council want to educate people on, is how to avoid making these mistakes in your own lawn or landscape. So even though they are scrutinized, turf grasses in general provide many benefits. I divided them into 3 sections here. We have environmental, recreational, and aesthetic benefits. In the Minnesota, we receive a lot of rain and snow in the winter time, and these turf grasses help with erosion control. They also help with heat dissipation in the summertime, some noise abatement, and going back to those aquifers, provide and help with groundwater recharge. When it comes to recreational benefits, once established, lawns and turf grass areas are fairly low cost to maintain. And they provide opportunities for us to get outside, to interact and, perform some physical activities such as going to the baseball field or playing disc golf. As far as aesthetic benefits, many people enjoy having a green, lush lawn, and some studies have shown it enhances quality of life and can even improve your mental health. So when we talk about lawns, one of the main questions I get is, how much water does my lawn need? And this question, this is kind of going to be more of a blanket statement, but it depends. Turfgrass water requirements, they're related to what you want your lawn to look like and how, lush you want it to be, performance and quality as you read up there. Do you want your lawn to be managed and look like, a golf course fairway? Or in the picture on the right, are you looking to have something that's more of a native landscape? And things that can influence that water requirements are species, which is going to be covered in another webinar topic. But all of these influence how much water you need to apply to your lawns and landscapes. So in general, when we're speaking of lawns, we recommend that during drought periods, you apply an inch of irrigation or water to your landscape through your sprinkler system. Now, I use the term drought period because in Minnesota, as I mentioned previously, we receive a lot of rain. And typically on average, we receive an inch of rain per week throughout the summer, which is when people are irrigating. But sometimes you might get 3 inches of rain in 1 week, and then the next 2 weeks receive, just maybe a few drops. And so during those drought periods, when we aren't having rain events, we recommend deep and infrequent watering. And we suggest you do that in 2 half-inch applications. And we call this the cycle and soak method. And one of the things that it does is it helps prevent runoff. If you were to apply all of that water at one time, you might see some of that water running off of your grass and your lawn into the sidewalk and eventually down into a storm drain, which is where we don't want it to end up. But when we bring up, applying half an inch of water, it's kind of hard to understand what that is. And so the rest of today's webinar, I'm going to walk us through how to conduct an irrigation audit. And so an irrigation audit, you can see those 4 simple steps there. But these 4 simple steps are taken from the extension website that you see there below. And that URL will be available on the webinar webpage that we have created and where you pre-registered for this event. But it's there here for you right now as well if you would like. But going through those 4 steps, we first want to inspect the irrigation system and then perform an irrigation audit or a performance test. That will allow you to determine the precipitation rate and the uniformity of the water that's being applied to your lawn. And once you know that, you can create an irrigation schedule so you know how long to run your system for. So going into that first point there, inspect your irrigation system. In my opinion, this is where homeowners can save the most water. And it's because you turn the irrigation system on while you are at home and you walk around your lawn. You walk around the irrigation zones and you're looking to see, are you watering those sidewalks? You look to see if there's any broken sprinkler heads around your lawn. So as I mentioned, you need to do that during the daytime. A lot of irrigation systems run at night. And because of that, you may not notice that your irrigation head or your sprinkler head is turned 180 degrees in the opposite direction and is watering the road instead of your lawn. Or maybe it's watering the house or the fence. These are things you can find out when you perform the first step of the irrigation audit and turn your irrigation system on while you are there. Now, these pictures show 2 kind of extreme examples of what you might find. But again, if you don't turn your system on and go and walk around and look for these type of things going on, you may not notice them. For example, in the picture on the left, we have a broken sprinkler head that's basically just a little jet shooting out water. And it's going to do that for the full 30 minutes, an hour that you run your irrigation system. But your irrigation system, it's going to turn off at 3 a.m. and by 8 a.m., all of that water has soaked into the soil profile and you may not see it. And so again, I can't stress enough the importance of going out and looking at your sprinklers and watch them run to find mistakes and things that you can change on your own. Some things that are a little less noticeable is in the picture on the left, we have a pipe that has broken underground. And again, that's something you may not see when you go and turn your irrigation system on. But if you walk around your lawn, if you see a spot that looks really green, that seems to be wetter than other areas, go and take a few steps on it. You know, stick a screwdriver in it and see how wet or dry the soil is. This picture is from, you know, a pipe breaking underneath the ground, and then a car came and rolled over it and sunk in there pretty deep. Now, as a person walking around, you may not sink that deep, but you will notice it's kind of spongy and it's kind of mushy. And that can be a red flag for you as something that might be an underlying problem, something going on underneath the soil profile. But the thing we see the most common thing we see is illustrated in the picture on the right. This is an irrigation or a sprinkler head that's not quite broken, but isn't working to its full potential, you could say. And again, this is something you may not notice if you aren't watching your irrigation system, if you don't inspect it, you know, at least once a year. So previously, we did 62 irrigation audits, and 19 of those saw no leaky sprinkler heads. And in other words, or another way you can say that, as you can read there on the left, that means that 70% of homes that we audited had at least one bad sprinkler head. Now, one bad sprinkler head can potentially lead to thousands of gallons of water being wasted. So if you happen to be a lawn that had 7 or 10 leaking heads, that can add up really quick and make your water bill a lot higher than you would want it to be. So again, I can't re-stress the importance of going out and inspecting your irrigation system at least once a year. And once you've inspected it and maybe made some alterations to the way your heads are spacing, things like that, you can move on to the performance test. And this is where we place catch cans evenly throughout the lawn. Here's a picture of a research site here at the University of Minnesota. Picture on the right shows you a detailed picture of one of the catch cans. These allow us to see how much irrigation or how much water is being applied to that, you know, specific section of lawn or turf. And once we run this performance test, we recommend that you place 20 catch cups out in each zone, you know, spread them evenly, and then you can run that zone for 30 minutes. Now, the catch cans we are using can be found at an irrigation supply store. It is going to cost some money, but something else you can do with things you might have around the house is you can, you know, keep some old tuna cans or even all those coffee and hot chocolate mugs that you don't use all the time. You could even take those out there and run an irrigation audit. Now, the only issue with using a can or a mug is it's going to be a little harder to know exactly how much water is in the cup or the can. So once you have run that performance test, you need to measure how much water is in each of those cups to determine precipitation rate. So to use the example of the catch cup here, if you look at the picture on the right, you can see we have about 1/4 inch of water in this catch cup. Now, for the irrigation audit, the system ran for 30 minutes. And when we determine precipitation rate, we like to calculate it in inches per hour. So if we double that 30 minutes to equal an hour, we can also times that 1/4 inch by 2, and we can find that our precipitation rate is that we apply 1/2 inch of irrigation every hour to our landscape. And that's for this system that we have out at the research facility here at the University of Minnesota. Yours might be different than what we have. But moving on with the example from the research site, let's say in this example calculation, we have those 20 catch cups. To get uniformity of the system, to see how evenly water is being spread across that irrigation zone, you take the average of the lowest 5 catch cups and you divide it by the average of all 20 catch cups. So not every one of those cups is going to have 1/4 inch of rain or 1/4 inch of irrigation, as I showed you in the picture. Some of them are going to have a little more, some of them are going to have a little less. So in this example, if our 5 lowest cups only have 0.19 inches, but the overall average did happen to be 1/4 inch of rain, you can see the uniformity of the system is 76%. Now in school, 76% gets you a C, but in terms of an irrigation audit, we only recommend you make adjustments if you see your system dip below 60%. So having an irrigation or having a uniformity of 76% is actually pretty good. The last step is, now that you know the precipitation rate and you know how uniform or evenly the water is being spread across that irrigation zone and landscape, you can create an irrigation schedule. Now, if you remember, the precipitation rate we calculated was 1/2 inch per hour. And earlier, I talked about applying 1 inch of water per week. And if you were to apply 1/2 inch twice a week, that would mean you would have to run your irrigation program for 60 minutes twice a week. And that would equate to 1 inch of water being applied to your lawn every week. Now, you can see some of those calculations below. If you wanted to maybe apply 1/3 of an inch 3 times a week, you can cross multiply those numbers and learn that you need to run your irrigation timer for 40 minutes rather than 60 minutes. And you'll notice the picture on the right shows an irrigation controller in the off position. This is something we also recommend to homeowners, is with the amount of rainfall we receive, maybe keep your irrigation system in the off position rather than on. A lot of times homeowners, come April, May, turn the irrigation system on and won't even think about it again until late September, October, when they have to turn it off. Basically, when things are going well and the lawn looks good, you don't typically worry about how much water you're using. But if you keep your system in the off position, it'll help you when those drought periods arise. You might start to notice the grass doesn't look quite as lush, quite as green, and you'll remember to go and turn the irrigation system on. It's a lot easier to remember to turn it on when things aren't going well than it is to turn it off when things are going well. But that's about all the information and time we have for today. I hope you're able to learn, from Brian and I, some important water information about the Twin Cities area and how to perform an irrigation audit to help you conserve a little bit of water and use it more efficiently in your lawns. Now, this information is going to be found on that webinar webpage that you see there at the top. It's the one that's underlined. But if you want some direct links to the irrigation audit, that's at the extension webpage there. And then the EPA also has a water sense program, and that site can lead to a lot of good information about, dryers and irrigation controllers that are EPA certified and meet EPA criteria through the water sense program. If you're someone who isn't comfortable performing their own irrigation audit, if you go one step further on the EPA's water sense website at that Irrigation Pro, that URL you see at the bottom, you can find someone in the area who is EPA certified to come out and perform one of these irrigation audits for you. Again, I hope this was informative, and we're looking forward to having all of you in the coming webinars. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's going to be giving and delivering some questions to us as the panelists here, if there are any. And the last thing I'll say before moving on to the questions is, if you would like to reach out to me personally, some of my contact information is down there in the bottom left. So with that, Chris, if we have any questions, Brian, Eric, and I will do our best to answer them.
Okay, I just want to encourage people to use the Q&A to type in their questions. So far, we have one question, and I'm going to direct this question to Shane. The question is, if someone lives in an apartment or homeowners association where the landscaping and irrigation is not their responsibility, how should they go about conducting an irrigation audit?
Great question. I don't have a whole lot of experience living in an HOA, but I do live in an apartment complex. And something I have done is I reached out to the person who was in charge of the apartment complex and said, hey, do you know who's in charge of irrigation, lawn mowing? and they directed me to the company that maintains the landscapes. And I haven't seen anything up to this point as far as them running an irrigation audit. But I think going through those channels of finding out if there's someone on the HOA, you know, the committee or the board that runs the HOA, speak with them, reach out to a landlord or a landlady. And more than anything, if you may not see results right away, but you asking those questions to them, I believe will ultimately lead to them having a better mindset of, oh, maybe I do need to make some changes on how I water or how I irrigate the area.
Okay, the next question is, and I think this is a fantastic question for Eric. Can you talk about some of the benefits of low input lawn alternatives such as fescues? I understand they require less water and maintenance overall.
Yes, a good question. We'll talk more in depth on this in the third webinar in August. But you know, definitely, especially as it concerns this topic, but overall in terms of input needs for turf grasses, the fine fescues in particular just need fewer inputs. So they stay green longer during drought. They don't grow as fast, so they don't need as much mowing. They seem to not get quite as many, have quite as many disease problems in Minnesota. They do a little better job keeping out the weeds. So there's all these reasons that you would want to consider, you know, in a situation where you could regrass, consider incorporating fine fescues. The fine fescues is a group of grasses, and we'll talk more about the different fine fescues. But in terms of low inputs, reducing water, they're really the best option. There are also tall fescue is another option. So tall fescue is related to the fine fescues, but it's much different grass, wider leaf blade. And this is a grass that has not been used very much in Minnesota. Traditionally kind of thought of as not an option here, but we think it is a really good option for a lot of sites in Minnesota. And one of the reasons it really fits well with what we're talking about today is that it's a very deep root system. So it is able to get water deep in the soil profile and shouldn't need as much irrigation. So in a situation where regrassing is an option or where you're starting from scratch on a lawn, species choice is really, really important. It's a great way to reduce water requirements or any other input requirement. Now, these grasses aren't perfect. They have other problems. For instance, the fine fescues don't handle heat tolerance as much, so that's usually not a problem here. But during this time of year, if you for instance would mow your fine fescue lawn on a hot dry day, that might cause some damage. If you have an area that gets a lot of play and use, maybe a sports field or something like that, or a park that's quite busy, fine fescues might suffer some damage during the summer as well. But overall, they're a really good option, and we'll go into that in more detail in August.
Okay, so here's another question. I'm going to direct this to Shane, but if anyone else has any input, they're welcome to chime in. In regards to the HOA question, there should be a board meeting that this question be asked during the meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not a question. It's important to keep HOAs lower. So they're asking they're kind of offering advice that during their board meetings, that's something that should be brought up at that time.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not super familiar with HOAs, but I have family members that are in them. And the reason I brought up, speaking to a committee member is I know I have an uncle who serves on the board and he takes care of problems and issues. And so if you know the committee or board member who is involved in those types of things, I think that's who you could talk to.
And also, I guess one of their other points is the extra money that they're using for water is increasing their HOA fees. So that's something that's important for all members of that association. They should be definitely keeping track of that so they keep their costs lower.
Yeah, this is Brian. I will say, having staffed for some of the 12-day period, the booth that we have at the State Fair in the horticulture building, we have received many questions from fairgoers who live in a place that's an HOA, and I've heard many a story about the excessive water use that this person has seen at their place of residence. So that combined with the fact that we're working with some communities that are working with HOAs to do audits and make repairs to old systems makes me think that, yes, this is an area that is ripe for a lot of work. There's a lot of potential to save a lot of water at HOAs, and it can be a lot of water because the properties are pretty big.
Okay, so this next question I'm going to direct to Eric. Do bee lawns need extra irrigation?
That's a good question. So a lot of you may have heard about bee lawns. Recently, we've been involved in some projects with entomologists here at the university on figuring out what should go in a bee lawn. So this would be a lawn that can be mowed, but include some flowering plants that provide resources for pollinators. So in general, they shouldn't need extra irrigation. We've designed the seed mixes such that so typically when you buy a bee lawn seed mix, and they're certainly available now in the Twin Cities, it's going to be fine fescue will be the turfgrass, and then the flowering plants that are there usually they're not going to use any extra amount of water either. They do pretty well under typical Minnesota growth conditions. So the idea with a bee lawn is a lower input lawn that also provides pollinator resources. So if you start with bee lawn seed that includes fine fescues in the mix, you should be able to, keep the water pretty low in terms of the amounts you apply. During establishment, however, so when you plant that bee lawn, if you plant it in early fall, for instance, you would need to keep that seed bed moist during establishment, which is just good practice for a lawn establishment anyway. But after it's established, we've got a lot of our research sites are in Minneapolis parks where they're not getting irrigated. They do just fine under typical precipitation without extra irrigation.
Okay, so our last question is, how are you educating the general public about watering wisdom? And that one can be directed to Shane, but I'm sure maybe Brian might have something to add too.
Yeah, so this is my first summer as the lawn water conservation educator here with the Turfgrass Science Group at the University of Minnesota. And previously, we've done outreach events where we maybe go to a farmer's market or a community invites me to provide a presentation such as this to the community. And with everything that has happened with COVID-19 this year, this webinar series is one thing we are trying to do to reach out to the typical or average homeowner consumer. And it's something that we hope will grow. There might be certain webinars that pique more interest than others. But ultimately, once everything settles down and we're able to meet in larger groups, have a state fair exhibit, those are the types of things we've done in the past and will continue to do in the future. And if this webinar series is received well, maybe it's something we add to the repertoire of things that we do to reach out to the community.
Thanks, Shane. And let me just add that two things that we plan to do in the future at some point when we can gather together in groups again safely. One of those is to create a mobile display, kind of a mobile lab in a trailer that we're outfitting to take to farmers markets, community events, environmental fairs, county fairs, and things of that nature, where we'll bring along examples of these different turf grasses, controllers, soil moisture sensors, and information about them. So you can see them, see how they work, get your hands actually on them and learn about them in person. So that's something that we're working on now. We can't do it right now, obviously, but we are planning on doing that when it's possible to do so. And another thing that is in the ground now and is just awaiting the ability to do something with it is our hands-on display demonstration site at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, where we have a number of different irrigation controllers set up in a big test plot, so you can come out and see exactly how they work, how to program them. We have ideas of doing some classes on how to conduct an irrigation audit out there. That's something we plan on doing in the future. In fact, we would have been doing that this summer if not for the COVID-19 restrictions that have happened. But we're very hopeful that we will have a chance to do that sometime soon, we hope.
Okay, so I have one comment from Kristen Meyer of Freshwater Association. Freshwater offers water conservation advisor training for volunteers who would like to serve as leaders in their communities. So that's something that for people who are interested in that, they might want to look into Freshwater for that opportunity.
And Chris, maybe if they reach out to us, we could put a link in our webinar webpage that could lead people to that Freshwater Association. Because ultimately the idea behind these webinars is they'll be available to the public on that webpage where you pre-registered, and we're hoping to put a lot of content on there so people will be able to hopefully find answers to just about any question they might have.
Okay, so here's our last question here. I don't have an automated system, I just tote around sprinklers. Any special tips for auditing and managing that?
I think the same rules could apply. If you water it by hand, maybe, put out a few of those catch cups, a couple of mugs, kind of spray as you normally would, and see how long it takes for those cups to fill up. Or if you have kind of the rainbow arcing sprinkler that you connect to the hose, you can do the same thing as set out cups maybe, on each end of the arc and some in between, and see how uniform it is, see how much water you're applying. And I think the same rules could apply. It's just instead of using an automated system, as you mentioned, you're manually watering, but you should still be able to set out those cups, determine a precipitation rate, and calculate how long you should leave that sprinkler out in your yard, or how long you need to kind of go over that area of yard that you're watering by hand.
So that seems to be it for questions, and I think that the time is about perfectly here to end.
Okay, well, thank you very much to everyone who participated. We appreciated your questions. We'll be back in 3 weeks, and be sure to check back to that website, the webinar webpage, where we'll hopefully constantly be adding some resources, and we're going to be uploading this video and PowerPoint for you to look at and refer to at a later date. And unless anyone has anything else to say, give you a couple of seconds.
We just have a nice thank you for the timely webinar.
Oh, okay.
That's our last comment.
All right, yeah. So with that, we're going to try to keep these to about 30 minutes and then about 15 minutes or so for the Q&A. So yeah, plan for about 45 minutes each time, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next one.